Well, I'm here to share my journey with you from the board of Planned Parenthood to the front lines of the pro-life movement. But before we begin with that story, I'd like you for just a moment to please close your eyes. Just close your eyes and imagine the world without internet, without cell phones, without computers. Imagine the world without ultrasound and without crisis pregnancy centers that saves lives. And now, open your eyes. It's probably impossible for many of you to imagine the world without cell phones. But that was my world in 1975 when I was asked to join the board of Planned Parenthood in New York City. I was born in New York and raised as a pastor's daughter, grew up in the church, knew little about abortion. Of course, in those days, there wasn't much information about abortion. Abortion had just become legal in 1973. So in 1975, I was asked to be on this board primarily because I had made some speeches in Mexico City for International Women's Year. And a group from New York sent me to Mexico City. They were called the Coalition of 100 Black Women. They sent me to New York as their representative. And these were women who were business women, politicians, civic leaders, the movers and shakers of New York. And they chose this young person to be their representative at this first International Women's Year conference. While there, I made about 2 or 3 speeches, and not to my knowledge, but they were published. It was reported back in New York. There's speeches that I made, and so when I got home, I was kind of a mini celebrity. And I was invited to be on 2 boards, the YWCA and the board of Planned Parenthood. And I said yes to both. I thought, this is wonderful. I finished college, I'm working in my career as an editor-reporter, and now I can take time and give back to my community and help the girls in my community. I jumped at that opportunity. I was so excited. When I arrived at the first board meeting at 282nd Avenue in Manhattan, at the Margaret Sanger Center, I took a bus from my job over to the clinic where the board meeting was. And it was interesting that some of the board members arrived in chauffeured limousines. As I went upstairs to the boardroom, I passed the clinic and I saw Hispanic women and African American women and Caucasian women in there, but primarily Hispanic African American women in the clinic. As we sat around the table, I realized that I was younger than everybody there. I was the youngest person there, and I was the only African American on the board. There were about 20 people there on the board. But I was so excited to be a part of helping this generation, my generation. We were given literature to read, and the literature focused on population control. It informed us about the fact that there were natural resources were shrinking, and there needed to be some efforts to control the population. I began to understand why Planned Parenthood was called Planned Parenthood World Population. But then I asked myself, which population are they trying to control? And the boomerang often came back to mine, to my ethnic group. And then I wondered, why is abortion more necessary for African Americans when in our schools, the schools are crumbling, we need books and resources in the inner city? Why is abortion so necessary? And we were also given literature on how abortions were performed. Now, in college, we had these wonderful debates about when viability, when is the fetus viable? Is it a mass of tissue? Is abortion murder? And we didn't know the answers, and so we just explored these in our discussions. But on the board, those answers were settled, because we were given literature that explained how these abortions were performed. And as I read this material, the questions were now answered. And I went back to the next board meeting and I said, this is traumatic. These procedures for the mother and her baby, it's traumatic. And a woman sat across from me and she reprimanded me, and with a very rabid voice she said, "It is not traumatic." And I kind of shrunk back, a little intimidated, and I looked around the table and I said, who are these people? Where am I? What is going on here? The biggest challenge that we faced while I was on the board were death certificates. The Department of Health in New York City demanded that a death certificate be issued for every abortion that was performed. I thought, death certificates? You only need a death certificate when someone is alive and they have died. Is abortion murder? One board meeting, Al Moran, the chairman, came into the board meeting and he said, I have good news to announce. In New York State, we have performed over 100,000 abortions, and everybody cheered and they applauded. And that night, as I slept, I dreamt of babies floating in the air, suspended in the air. And I woke up and I said, God is going to hold me accountable. I have got to get off this board. I have got to get off of this board. But then I thought, I'm the only no vote. If I get off the board, who's going to vote no? So I decided to stay on the board, to be a thorn in their side. But I decided not just to sit passively on the board, but also to become active. I said, let me get into the schools and talk to these young people and keep these girls off of the abortionist table. And so I developed a talk. I joined what Planned Parenthood called the Speakers Bureau. And I developed a talk called Love Carefully. Now, Love Carefully was the title of a brief slogan, a brief campaign that Planned Parenthood had. And I took that title and I said, that's going to be the title of my talks. And during this training, I learned the subtle yet powerful use of language. We were told never to use the word baby or embryo or fetus. Fetus means little one. Never use those words. They said, always say mass of tissue or contents of the uterus. And don't call girls mothers. Never call a girl a mother. If she's pregnant, call her a woman. And never call a boy a father. Call him a man, no matter how young he may be. And students were to be notified that they would not need parental notification or consent. In those days, we just had the kind of phones that hung on the wall in the house. That was the only phone that was there. And usually the mother answered the phone. So the Planned Parenthood receptionist or nurse would tell that student, she would ask, what is the name of your best friend? Amy? Okay, I'm going to call your house and I'm going to say, I'm Amy. And so when your mother picks up and you hear it's Amy, that's me. I'm calling to remind you of your appointment. And they told the girls that they did not need parental notification or consent. They also told them that abortions were performed by taking a straw and sucking out the contents of the uterus, a straw. And they told boys, would you never, ever have to worry about getting a girl pregnant? And they asked girls, would you never ever want to have to worry about getting pregnant? We can tie your tubes. And so what do teenagers put on their feet? In those days, we call them sneakers. And he tied them and untied them. But here, these children, these young people were offered permanent solutions to unwanted pregnancy. We also taught them about venereal disease. My talk did not focus on abortion. My talk had one focus. How do you keep the sperm from meeting the egg? Say no. And the teachers were so glad to have someone come into the school to talk to kids about sex. And kids, when they heard S-E-X, oh, we have someone who's going to talk to us about S-E-X. They were so excited. And so 2 and 3 classes would be crammed into a large room like the science lab. And I would inform them about venereal diseases. That's what they were called back then. Now they're delicately called sexually transmitted infections or diseases. Diseases is not such a nice word, so now the latest thing is STIs, infections. In my day, there were only 5. I think now there are over 35 sexually transmitted infections. But I would ask these kids, well, what are your plans for the future? What do you want to be? How do you see your life? And they would tell me, we had blackboards and chalk. And so I'd write on the blackboard with the chalk their plans for the future, what they wanted to be. And, well, how are you going to get there? And they said, well, I have to go to school or trade school. And they would give me the steps to reach those goals. And then I would ask, what can interrupt these plans for your future? And it would be finances or the death of a parent or something like that, but always on the list, an unwanted pregnancy came up. And I said, do you know how to keep the sperm from meeting the egg? And they would say, you can't get pregnant if you're in love. You can't get pregnant if it's your first time. You can't get pregnant if you don't enjoy it. You can't get pregnant if you don't want to. You can't get pregnant if you do it standing up. And I would say to them, does the sperm know it's your first time? Does the egg care? How do you keep the sperm from meeting the egg? Say no. And they would be, say no. But then, at the end of my talk, I had these devices, birth control and contraceptive devices, because Planned Parenthood told me the only way I could get into the school was to show these devices. And so I put them out on a table, and I explained that birth control prevents the birth of a baby. IUD, that's birth control. Conception still occurs, but a spontaneous abortion happens with an IUD. And then I would explain the contraceptives, the ones that keep the sperm from meeting the egg, and I'd show those. And the kids would run up to the table and they would look at all of this. And then I would put it back in my big plastic bag and I'd say, but how do you keep the sperm from meeting the egg? And always the say no was a little lower, was a little less forceful. And I realized that we were giving them 2 messages, and the messages were confusing. When I relocated to California, of course, I resigned from the board. I was freelancing then. I had already published my first book. And so then I decided, let me do some more research on Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood. And I realized that Margaret Sanger had what she called the Negro Project, because she realized that colored ministers were more influential in the community than any physician. So the Negro Project was to recruit physicians and physicians' families, pastors and pastors' families to promote this idea of birth control. And I understood why I was recruited for the board. She was part of a group of eugenicists, and they felt that certain ethnic groups were dysgenic, meaning they were impure, they were biologically defective or deficient. These ethnic groups she labeled the weeds of society. And she said, we must stop the multiplication of the unfit for race betterment. We do not want word to get out, said Margaret Sanger, that we want to exterminate the Negro population. And the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members. As I read about her, in her own books, I repented of my involvement and asked God to use me as a voice to tell the truth. And I started an organization called Black Californians for Life. There were 5 of us. And we would go to pastors, we'd hold lunches, and we'd tell them about Planned Parenthood and their plan. And they thought we were a bunch of hysterical women running around. Nobody's trying to commit genocide on the black population. No one's out to exterminate us. Please just be calm. And we were sharing our various experiences. One pastor, though, did listen. He opened a crisis pregnancy center, and thousands of lives have been saved. And I never tell his name because usually when I speak, there's someone from Planned Parenthood sitting in the audience. And they're not bad people. Some of them really do feel that they're helping, but they are not helping those of us who are determined to obey God. In my talks, I would talk about abortion. What does the word abortion mean? Where did the word abortion come from? Abortion comes from this Latin word, A-B-O-R-I-R-I. And it means, the root of that, O-R-I-O-R, means to be born or to rise. And it has the idea of the natural progression taking place, that the sun is rising. Now, we know the sun doesn't rise, that we know that there's another dynamic, but from our perspective, it looks like the sun is rising. And that's what this word has the idea of, the sun rising and then setting and then rising. It has a natural progression. That's what that means. And then the ab means to bring to an end. So the prefix ab in front of that root word has the idea of keeping the sun from rising, of stopping a natural progression. And for the baby, it means to perish by untimely death. Implied in the word abortion is the idea that the cessation of life is as unnatural as interfering with the rising of the sun. Well, abortion has been very successful in eliminating over 20 million African American lives. We're going to look at a video right now. In one of my talks, I was asked, does the Department of Health in New York City still require death certificates for abortions? And I said, let me check. So I called the New York Department of Health. And I was told a death certificate is not given unless the induced abortion is a live birth, no matter the gestation period, as long as it's within the legal abortion time. What's considered a live birth, I asked? A birth is considered to be live if there is voluntary muscle movement or beating of the heart. I probed further. By voluntary muscle movement, do you mean breathing? Yes. The abortion is considered to be a live birth only if the baby takes a breath before it dies. Only if it takes a breath. Abortion was supposed to be legal, but rare. And abortion is legal, but it is not rare. It impacts every community. It impacts every ethnic group. It impacts everyone who decides to step outside of God's boundaries. During my doctoral research, I learned that abortion was the solution to the Negro problem. In 1969, President Nixon commissioned this group, the Commission on Population Growth and the American Future, to evaluate this problem of 5 million Negroes and how that was going to impact the United States. And the commission recommended several things: to take Planned Parenthood, subcontract Planned Parenthood, hire them, put them in the inner cities, and let Planned Parenthood have these freestanding abortion facilities because they felt women would use that more frequently. They decided to, they recommended that the Supreme Court pass the right to vote for women, lower the voting age for young people from 21 to 18, not so they could vote younger, but that they would be considered mature sooner. And it seems that they are winning, but you can make a difference. You could make a difference in the way you live your life. Because God is not trying to keep you from having fun. When he says sex is for marriage between a man and a woman, God is not trying to keep you from having fun. He has set safe boundaries to keep you safe. It's like the parent who says, don't run into the street, to tell their child, don't run between the cars. They don't want their child to be killed. God does not want you to suffer the negative consequences, even if you don't get a venereal disease or STI, even if you don't get pregnant, the broken heart, all the consequences of disobeying God, God does not want you to experience that. Romans 12:1 and 2 says, to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and don't let the world press you into its mold. In other words, don't let the world make you look like them. Don't let the world define who you are and tell you who you are and tell you how to be a sexual being. You have to put on the belt of truth and get your information from God's Word, the Bible, and apply it to your heart and your life and your mind. I told my daughter that she was going down the aisle a virgin. I said, or you're going down the aisle in a coffin, because I'll take you out. I said, in this house, you will keep yourself sexually pure. Oh, yes, you will in this house. I don't care what they're doing down the aisle, down the pew, or in your classroom. In this house, you will keep yourself. And I found that parents sometimes don't like to share that information with their children because they say, well, I wasn't a virgin when I got married. And I say, since when did the Bible say train the child up in the way you went? Train them up in the way they should go. Well, let's look and see who's having abortions today. These are the statistics from the Allen Guttmacher Institute. 43% Protestants, 27% Catholics, 13% born-again evangelical Christians. That's 83% of people who say they know God are having the abortions. If we stop having abortions, we'll close every Planned Parenthood facility in the United States. So we have to make decisions about how we're going to live our lives and decide to obey God. It's not old-fashioned. It is not. Now, we are doing some good things. We have pregnancy resource centers that are saving lives. Abortions are on the decline nationally, and that's because sexual activity rates are down. Fewer young people are having sex outside of marriage. In fact, a recent study said that 73% of girls and 72% of boys aged 15 to 17 are choosing to abstain. And students on college campuses are proactive. There's a very active club right here at Biola University. More and more pastors and churches are becoming involved in the pro-life movement. And so we're doing a lot, but there's nothing that impacts our world, our society, our community, our churches more than the individual decision and the individual choice to keep yourself sexually pure. Ladies, when he says, "Oh, but please, because I love you," what he really means is, "I love you because you're easy. I love you because you'll give it up for a movie and a Coke. I love you because you make me feel good and you don't require anything. Oh, yes, I love you." When a man really loves you, he puts a ring on your finger and he walks you down the aisle and he says, "I do." That's what love is. And gentlemen, when she says, "Well, you're not very macho, are you? And is something wrong with you? And what's the matter? And aren't you attracted to me? And aren't I?" You walk away and find the woman you want to be the mother of your children. That's not it. Now, for those who have had an abortion or you know someone who's had an abortion, there's counseling, and we have counselors here. Would you stand? We have counselors here. They're going to be at the table outside. If you know someone who needs some literature or some materials, we invite you to stop by their table. And I'd like to give you this one last comment that abortion is not the solution. There is another solution to that unwanted pregnancy, and it's called adoption.
I was adopted when I was 3 days old. My family loves me a lot. I love them just as much as they love me, both my adoptive family and my birth family. My birth mom was 16 and pregnant. I can't even imagine how hard it was for her. But she chose life and made me possible. Turned the unplanned into a loving plan.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.